Welcome to Books in Brief, where we explore the key ideas of great books and how to understand them in everyday life. Today, we are incredibly excited to welcome you to a deep dive into The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker. We are going to look really closely at a part of your life that you probably spend a massive amount of time doing, but perhaps very little time intentionally designing.
Right. We truly do spend our entire lives gathering. I mean, if you look back at your calendar over the last year, you will see this relentless parade of, board meetings, birthday parties, networking events, and family dinners. But if we are being completely honest with ourselves, most of these moments are incredibly underwhelming.
Yeah, they really are. We often leave feeling totally uninspired or even worse, just drained. And the core issue behind that disappointment is actually quite simple. We consistently shrink what is fundamentally complex human challenge down into just a basic logistical one.
Exactly. When we decide to host something, our brains immediately default to worrying about the AV equipment or the cutlery or the catering. We focus entirely on the stuff in the room rather than the people in the room.
That is exactly the script we are going to flip today. Our mission is to figure out how to transform those ordinary, sometimes forgettable moments into unforgettable, meaningful experiences by placing people right at the center. And the first and most critical step in this framework is realizing that you need a highly specific purpose.
Yes. And it is so easy to fall into the trap of confusing a category with a purpose.
Yeah.
This happens to literally all of us. If you ask a colleague why they're hosting a networking event, they will almost always say, well, the purpose of a networking event is to network.
Right. Or if you ask a friend about a birthday party, they just say the purpose is to celebrate a birthday. It's totally circular logic. And that guarantees you will just revert to the standard boring template for that category. People just end up wandering around a sterile room, awkwardly handing out business cards, simply because that is what you do at a networking event.
Circular logic completely fails us when we want to create something memorable. A true purpose must be specific, unique, and crucially, it must be disputable. This concept is brilliantly illustrated in The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker through the Passover Principle.
Oh, I love the Passover principle. It is such a great reframing tool.
It really is. During the Jewish holiday of Passover, there is a traditional, ritualized question. Why is this night different from all other nights? As a host, you need to ask yourself that exact same question. Why is this specific gathering different from all the other gatherings I have hosted or attended? A real purpose has to take a stand.
That makes a lot of sense. If your purpose is just to celebrate love at a wedding, no one can argue with that. It is bland.
Right. But if your purpose is to ritually thank our parents for their sacrifices before we start our own family, that is highly specific. It immediately helps you make concrete decisions about who to invite, how to structure the evening, and what to focus on.
I really love looking at how this plays out in high-stakes environments, too, like the New York Times and their famous Page One meeting. For nearly 70 years, this was one of the most consequential daily meetings on Earth. The top editors would gather in this imposing room around a massive, intimidating King Arthur-style wooden table.
Yes, and they would fiercely pitch their stories, competing with one another to secure real estate on the front page of the physical newspaper. It was a deeply entrenched, highly ritualized battle.
Exactly. But as the digital age took over, the category of the morning print pitch meeting was no longer serving their actual purpose. The survival of the paper depended on digital metrics and real-time news, not just the print edition that would come out the next day.
The transformation of that specific meeting is a perfect case study in how purpose dictates structure. Executive editor Dean Baquet realized that the 70-year-old ritualized format was actually holding the entire organization back. To change the deeply ingrained culture of the newsroom, he knew he had to completely dismantle and rebuild the gathering itself.
And he did that by physically changing the room, right? He removed that intimidating King Arthur table and replaced it with glass walls, relaxed red couches, and an open layout.
He did. He also changed the time of the meeting to match the faster digital news cycle. And most importantly, they stopped leading with print pitches. Instead, they started the meeting by looking at audience digital metrics on big screens. He completely shifted the newsroom's culture and purpose by changing the physical gathering. What do you think about how physical space changes purpose?
I think that is an incredibly important point because it shows that every single detail, including the room itself and the furniture in it, either supports your purpose or fights against it.
Yeah.
And that physical boundary is so crucial because it forces you to make the absolute hardest choice a host has to make. I am talking about who actually gets to step inside that room.
Yes, the power of exclusion. It is a tough topic for a lot of people.
It really is. Let's talk about closing doors. I will admit, excluding people feels inherently wrong to most of us. We are taught from childhood that the more the merrier. But the argument here is that over-inclusion actually threatens the success of a gathering. It is easy to default to inviting everyone just to be polite, but the politeness can destroy the intimacy you are trying to build.
It does feel counterintuitive, especially for those of us who naturally want to be accommodating. But exclusion is absolutely essential. There's a great quote from Barack Obama's aunt who famously said, "If everyone is family, no one is family." When you invite everyone to an event just to be polite, you completely dilute the shared purpose.
So you have to fiercely protect your gathering.
Exactly. You have to keep the bobs out. A bob is someone who means perfectly well, but who simply does not align with the specific purpose of the gathering.
Like if you were having a highly focused, intense strategy session to challenge your company's status quo.
Right. In that scenario, the senior executive who loves the status quo and dominates conversations is a bob for that specific meeting. If you invite him just to spare his feelings, the meeting will fail. If everyone is invited, no one feels truly held by the group. By closing the door, you actually create the room.
By closing the door, you create the room. That is such a powerful way to reframe exclusion as an act of protection for your guests. And once you have the right people in the room, you have to think very carefully about the venue as a subconscious nudge. Where we gather tells our guests exactly how to behave before a single word is even spoken.
That brings us to what is called the Chateau Principle. The concept is straightforward but constantly overlooked. Do not host a meeting in a French chateau if you do not want people to act like French royalty.
That makes perfect sense.
Mm.
The venue completely dictates behavior and sets the emotional tone.
It does. If you want a relaxed, vulnerable conversation where people feel safe sharing mistakes, a corporate boardroom with a rigid hierarchy of seats and fluorescent lighting is going to fight you every single step of the way. We also have to consider the physical dynamics of perimeter, area, and density.
Right, because a space that is far too large absolutely kills the energy. It lacks the necessary density for human connection.
Exactly. Imagine hosting a 40th birthday party for 50 people in a massive high school gymnasium. The guests will be standing so far apart that they will naturally clump into small, awkward groups, just whispering to each other. That vibrant party energy you wanted will completely evaporate.
You see this all the time with modern remote work, too. A massive Zoom meeting with 80 silent black squares creates a very different behavioral nudge than a focused video call with just 4 people. And speaking of behavioral nudges, it is so easy to default to the chill host persona because professionally and socially, we are taught to be accommodating.
Oh, the chill host. That is a huge problem today.
There is such a modern obsession with being a low-key host who just says, oh, come over whenever, sit wherever, we will figure it out as we go. It sounds nice. But abdicating control in a social setting actually creates anxiety for your guests, not freedom.
The psychological reality behind the chill host is fascinating. Being a chill host is actually a form of selfishness disguised as kindness. You might think you're giving your guest freedom, but when you refuse to take charge, you are abdicating your power. You leave your guests floating in a skipperless ship.
And what always happens on a skipperless ship?
The most dominant, loudest person in the room takes over. Your quiet guests get talked over, the original purpose of the gathering gets entirely lost, and people leave feeling drained and unseen.
The alternative to being a chill host is exercising what is art of gathering. How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker calls generous authority. A host must use their power to fiercely protect, equalize, and connect their guests. You take control, but you use that control entirely for the benefit of the group, not your own ego.
A legendary example of generous authority in action comes from the founder of the TED Conference, Richard Saul Wurman. He had established a strict no-ties rule for the gathering. The purpose was to ensure everyone felt like equals, intentionally stripping away the traditional corporate armor that high-powered men used to signal their status.
I can already see where this is going. Someone definitely wore a tie.
Oh, absolutely. One day, his good friend Nicholas Negroponte, the founder of the MIT Media Lab, blatantly violated this rule and walked around wearing a tie before his presentation. To enforce the carefully curated culture of the gathering and equalize his guests, Wurman actually walked onto the stage in Monterey with a pair of scissors and physically cut off his friend's tie in front of the audience. That's an important point about protecting the culture of the room.
Wow. It sounds incredibly intense to witness that as an audience member, but I really see the brilliance in it. It completely shatters the expectation that the rules only apply to the people at the bottom. The moment those scissors came out, every single person in that room knew the host was fiercely protecting the egalitarian culture he promised them.
It definitely sends a clear message.
So how can we apply that kind of spice to our own gatherings and get people to truly connect without necessarily wielding scissors? This brings us to the fascinating difference between traditional etiquette and pop-up rules, and how we can use them to create temporary alternative worlds.
Etiquette is generally about fixed, unspoken societal norms. It is often exclusionary because it relies on everyone coming from the exact same background and knowing which fork to use or how to address someone properly.
Right, it can feel very stuffy and rigid.
Exactly. Pop-up rules, on the other hand, are temporary, highly explicit, and democratic. They allow incredibly diverse groups of people to gather on equal footing because the rules apply only to that specific space and time. Furthermore, they expire the moment the event ends. By implementing a pop-up rule, you create a one-time world where people feel liberated to act differently than they do in their heavy day-to-day lives.
A wonderful example of this from The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker, is the author's personal experiment with her friends in New York. They call them the I Am Here days.
Those days are a perfect illustration of pop-up rules.
They really are. The host and her friends realized they were always distracted when they hung out. They were physically present but mentally somewhere else, constantly checking their phones to see if a better option had come along. So they created specific days with strict pop-up rules.
And what were the rules?
The rules were simple, but incredibly demanding. If you agree to come, you must stay for the entire 12 hours of the gathering, and there is absolutely no technology allowed. No checking emails, no texting your partner, no looking up directions on a map app.
We really need to look at the psychological result of that restriction. In our modern world, we are burdened by infinite choices and constant digital distraction. Imposing a strict restriction like no phones for 12 hours is actually profoundly liberating.
It really is. It forces pure, unavoidable presence.
Precisely. Because no one could check out mentally or escape into their screens when there was a lull in the conversation, the group naturally pushed through the shallow small talk. They achieved a deep, magical level of connection because they were forced to engage entirely with the city and with each other. They created a temporary alternative world that existed just for them on that specific day, bound by a rule that vanished at midnight.
Okay, let's unpack how we actually kick off these magical alternative worlds.
Yeah.
Because you cannot just flip a switch the moment people walk through the door. We have to talk about the 90% rule. We tend to think a gathering begins when the clock strikes 7 or when the CEO steps up to the podium.
But that is a misconception. A gathering actually begins the very moment a guest discovers it exists. The invitation, the emails leading up to it, the tone of the calendar invite, all of that is doing heavy lifting before the event even starts.
That is a critical insight for any host. 90% of the gathering success is actually set in motion beforehand. You cannot just wait for people to show up and hope they magically adopt the right mindset.
You must prime your guests. For example, if you are hosting a high-stakes corporate retreat where you need people to be vulnerable and share their professional failures, you might send them a physical workbook a week in advance asking them to reflect on a time they struggled. This primes their minds.
And then what happens when they actually arrive?
When they physically arrive, you must usher them across the threshold from the chaotic outside world into your curated space. A brilliant example of ushering comes from the performance artist Marina Abramovich. Before her audiences experience her intense, silent performances, she does not just let them walk in off the loud city streets.
Right, she makes them go through a whole process.
She makes them sit in a transition room, lock their belongings in a locker, and put on noise-canceling headphones to experience complete sensory deprivation for several minutes. She deliberately ushers them out of their busy lives and prepares their minds for her temporary alternative world.
I love that concept of ushering. It acknowledges that people are carrying the baggage of traffic, stressful emails, and daily life right up to your front door.
Yeah.
And once you have ushered them in, you have to launch the event. Here's the golden rule. Open cold. Never, ever start with logistics.
That is so important. When you start with logistics, you immediately drain the energy from the room.
Do not start a beautiful charity gala by reading a dry list of bronze-level sponsors.
Yeah.
Do not start a crucial company meeting by pointing out where the bathrooms are and going over the fire exits.
Exactly. You subconsciously signal to your guests that this is just another mundane administrative event, exactly like all the others. Instead, you need to launch properly by honoring and awing your guests right out of the gate. There is a great story of an accounting professor who understood this dynamic perfectly.
The one who memorized the names.
Yes. On the very first day of class, instead of standing at the podium and reading off a boring roll call, he walked around the lecture hall. He held direct eye contact with 70 different students, and entirely from memory. He pointed to and perfectly pronounced the complicated first and last names of every single one of them. He never once looked at a list.
That is incredible. It honors the students profoundly and demands their awe and absolute attention from the very first second. Logistics, like the syllabus and office hours, can wait until the second act.
It shatters the expectation that you can just hide in the back row and passively consume the lecture. You are immediately, undeniably part of the experience.
Now, let's talk about what happens during the main event. How do we get past the phony, puffed-up versions of ourselves that we bring to gatherings? How do we banish what is called the conference self?
The conference self is that polished, invulnerable, perfect persona we all put on when we want to impress people. We hide our flaws, we speak in bullet points, and we try to look as successful as possible. To break through this thick layer of armor, a host has to intentionally design for realness.
And one of the most effective methods for achieving this is a format called 15 toasts, right?
Yes. This format was actually designed and used at a private dinner hosted alongside the World Economic Forum. That is a place absolutely notorious for people showing off their most inflated conference selves.
The 15 toasts format is brilliant in its simplicity and its strictness. The rule is that over the course of the dinner, every single person at the table must give a toast to a specific overarching theme, like a good life or fear. But here is the crucial catch, and the pop-up rule that makes the whole thing work. They must share a personal story, not an idea.
That distinction between a story and an idea is everything when it comes to human connection. Ideas are safe. They are intellectual stump speeches that we have rehearsed 100 times to sound smart in meetings. Stories, however, require genuine vulnerability.
They require you to talk about a specific moment in your life, a terrible decision you made, a profound heartbreak, or a quiet triumph.
Exactly. When high-powered executives at that dinner were forced by the pop-up rule to tell stories instead of pitching their brilliant ideas, egos were physically left at the door. Genuine, authentic connections were forged between people who otherwise would have just exchanged business cards and forgotten each other by morning.
So we have created this incredible alternative world. People are connected, and they have shed their conference selves. What does this all mean when the night is finally over? This brings us to perhaps the hardest part of any gathering for both the host and the guests, accepting mortality.
It's so true. We have such a hard time letting things end. We tend to just let events slowly fizzle out if people awkwardly slip out the back door, or we let them drag on hours past their prime because we do not want to say a definitive goodbye.
A great host must bravely accept that every gathering has an end, and they must manage that end with the same generous authority they used to start it.
Just as you ushered people into the experience, you must help them make meaning of what just happened and prepare them for re-entry into the real world. You cannot just abruptly turn on the harsh overhead lights and shout that it is time to go. You have to provide a structured closing that honors the time you spent together.
There is a beautiful, very practical anecdote about re-entry from The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters, by Priya Parker. The author's mother hosted a 6-week gathering in her basement for 12 teenage girls. The purpose was to help them navigate the immense challenges of high school, self-esteem, and identity.
That is a very vulnerable time in a young person's life.
It really is. Over the 6 weeks, it became a deeply intimate space where the girls shared their deepest fears. But the mother knew these girls had to eventually return to the hallways of their high school, where the social dynamics were harsh, judgmental, and unforgiving. So at the very end of the final gathering, she didn't just say goodbye. She gave each of the girls a small, multicolored spiral bracelet.
That bracelet was much more than a party favor. It was a physical thread of reentry. It connected the safe, temporary alternative world of the basement back to the cold reality of the high school.
Right. When the girls saw each other wearing those subtle bracelets in the chaotic hallways, they had a shared understanding and a secret bond.
They knew what they had experienced together, and they knew they had an ally. By giving them that physical token, the host ensured the power and the safety of the gathering survived long after the actual event had ended. What do you think about the importance of that final thread?
I think it is the perfect way to honor the time people have given you, and it proves that the impact of a gathering can outlast the gathering itself. Which brings us to you, our listener. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. I challenge you to open up your calendar right now. Pick just one upcoming gathering that you are in charge of.
It could be a dinner party, a weekly work meeting, or even just a casual coffee date.
Look at it and ask yourself, what is my specific, disputable purpose for this event? And how will I use generous authority to protect that purpose and protect my guests? Do not just accept the default template. Close the doors, banish the chill host, and create a gathering that actually matters.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this brief exploration of the book, feel free to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes. New book insights are coming soon. See you next time.